welcome to Makeup and Monarchies. If you're new here, thank you so much for watching this video. If you don't mind hitting the subscribe button, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. This week we're talking about James V of Scotland, kind of veering into him from Stirling Castle, because he did a lot of work on Stirling. So I do want to talk about him for a little bit, or do an episode on him, because I find him very intriguing and important to Scotland. Everything I'm going to be using today is listed in the description box down below. We do have two new products that I'm using today. I'll have them listed. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, and I don't think there is. So with that being said, let's get into it. Hello. It's been a few weeks since we did this. I feel like it's been forever since I've recorded one of these. So today we're talking about James V of Scotland, and this kind of like comes on the heels of what I did last week, which was I was just out in the garden, so I'm sweaty. It's hot out. Yesterday it was 90 something degrees, so bear with me. It's hot. So this is coming on the heels of me doing the episode on, and my windows are open. My windows are open because it's hot out, so I'm sorry about the car noise. Anywho, we talked about Stirling Castle, and one of the main builders and renovators that did a lot of work to it was James V, so I kind of wanted to get back into talking about the monarch, hence the Makeup of Monarchies. And I have new makeup today, so that's exciting and that's fun. So that's why we're talking James V. So James V was born at Linlithgow Palace on April 10th of 1512. He was the third son of James IV and Margaret Tudor, daughter of Henry Tudor and Elizabeth of York. He was the only surviving legitimate son of James IV. Prince James was baptized. Okay, I told you. Sorry. I do put music to this, so I hope it covers it. And my mic's on, so we're in a win today, guys. Thank God. James was baptized the day after he was born and was given the title of Duke of Rothesay. When James was 17 months old, his father was killed at the Battle of Flodden by his uncle's army, Henry VIII. And so little baby James was now king. He was crowned at the chapel royal at Stirling Castle on September 12th of 1513. Margaret Tudor, his mother, was accepted as regent by the nobility. This was in James IV's will. He also stated that Margaret remained the regent, or she was able to keep her position, as long as she remained unmarried, a widow. James V's reign lasted with a regent for about 15 years. Remember that even though it's a child monarch, a child king, they still legally really couldn't reign as the sole monarch until they were like 18 to 21 years old. That's when they like reached maturity age to be a monarch. So that is why it lasted so long. But James was kind of young to be king. We're going to get into why that happened. So his mother's regency was quickly questioned by John, Duke of Albany. John was born in France, and he was James's second cousin. He was also the nearest male heir to the throne after James and his younger brother Alexander, Duke of Ross, who was born in April of 1514, at 7 months after his father's death. John was also the grandson of James II of Scotland. I've done episodes on some of these people, so I'm going to list them all in the description box down below in case you want to go back and watch those. Maybe refresh your memory on what happened during their reign, or it might be fun to just kind of go through and see like the lines and do further research on it. That's what I do. So in August of 1514, 4 months after the birth of Alexander, the Dowager Queen Margaret married again to Archibald Douglas, 6th Earl of Angus. Not a good option, my girl. The marriage was opposed by a lot of the nobility because they feared an advancement by the Douglases. They then tried to end Margaret's regency because she remarried, which in turn went against the will of her late husband. She was removed as regent by the Privy Council, who then appointed the Duke of Albany as her replacement. I am going to do a little bit of like a bronzy, smoky eye today. It's very like, again, we've had some hot weather, and that is my go-to in the summer because it's very, I don't know, summery, I guess. And then we're going to do some glowy, dewy skin today as well, which I'm excited about. So Albany showed up at Dumbarton Castle a few months earlier in May of that year. He brought with him 8 ships and a troop of French soldiers. He went to Edinburgh on May 26th, and in July, Parliament, make a difference, it does, confirmed John's restoration as the Duke of Albany and his position as regent. John's supporters wanted his homecoming to bring a stable government, but Francis I of France wanted to use him to keep support for the Old Alliance, which we talked about 2 episodes ago with Max. I think I mentioned it a little bit last week. Remember 2 weeks ago, Max talked about the Old Alliance and why it began. So like he said, it continued for a few centuries. So the first year of John's regency held a strong defense of his authority was crucial to nip in the bud any possible crumbling of the Scottish government, either into an anarchy or into English control. So I'm gonna get going on I'm gonna do a little, probably gonna be more of a halo, I think. Halo eye today. So I'm just taking, this is Swiss Chocolate by MAC, and I'm just gonna buff out and like line my lash line with it. Since John's, we're going to start a new one. Since John's, there we go. This is what I wanted. So I just winged that a little bit, that shadow. So I'm going to take that Swiss Chocolate color and I'm just going to bring it down on the bottom lid and get some shadow in my eye. And then see how I like have that line of the shadow? I'm going to take some more and I'm going to lightly blend that out. I'm going to bring it towards the middle and I'm going to bring that out. So see, I flipped my brush so that I can kind of keep that color. Why is that looking like that? Transition again. I can always go back in with the malt, which I'm going to do right now, just to buff that line out up here a little bit more. Here we go. So since John's role was to act for the king with full authority laid with the goodwill of the king, in actuality it was the person who had control of him and claimed to speak with his voice. People are people. That never stops, does it? It's a lesson for us to learn. People are people and they will act the way they do. It doesn't matter the time period, it doesn't matter the situation. James's mother and stepfather, Angus, or Duke of Angus, were possibly hostile to John's intentions, and in turn, James was removed from their influence. John besieged Stirling Castle, and Margaret was forced to give up possessions of her sons, the King and Duke of Ross. James wouldn't see his mother again for 2 years, and having lost the regency, her income, and the control of her sons, Margaret left court in September of 1515. She went to Linlithgow Palace for her confinement, then to Tintagel Castle. It was there that she gave birth to her daughter, Lady Margaret Douglas, in Northumberland. After the birth, she was sick from childbirth and the long journey, so she wasn't told about the death of her son Alexander until December of 1515. She was told once she had fully recovered, and Angus, her husband, made peace with John and in the latter half of 1516. In February of 1517, I'm going in with this goodie. that this was such an underrated palette, and I wish they had done bigger hype on it because it's really good. So I'm going to use the color Teak, and I'm just going to go in and pat in this color on. It is like metallic, so pushing the pigment in is a better way to get the pigment to adhere onto the base or primer that you're using for your shadow. So I'm just, again, going in and I'm pushing pigment in, not swiping, pushing. And I'm just going to push that in the crease, kind of blend out. I'm actually going to go in with the Dystopian color in this with a smaller stippling brush and just kind of put it in the corner here just to deepen that outer V a little bit. So you can see I'm not wiping, I'm just working that in, and can blend out in a minute. Just want to add like a little depth in that corner. So I'm going to work that color out a little bit on the edges. So again, just coming through with that color on the outer V. And you can see I'm like picking up and just stapling that in, and then I'm going to come out here and kind of drag a little bit, but still then you can kind of pull that color into the crease. I'm going to go back in with Dystopian, and I'm going to just lightly smudge my lower lash line about like a quarter of the way in. I don't want to pull it all the way in because it's going to really, I'm going to lose the openness of my eyes. I don't know if you can see. You can. There's that. So in February of 1517, James was brought to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh or from Stirling. When an outbreak of the plague hit the city, he was moved into the care of Antoine d'Arcs, I think, at Craigmillar Castle, which is just south of Edinburgh. And between 1517 and 1520, John stayed in France and didn't exercise his regency in person. I don't know if I want to do a wing or just I don't think I'm going to do a wing. So I'm using the Vive Power Ink Liner in black. I know my hair is a mess. We're working the messy bun today. It is hot out and I do not feel like flat ironing or curling. So I'm just doing a really small line, just a really thin line. And I didn't wing it, but I kind of like pulled out so it just kind of melts into that deeper outer V that I did. Let's hope I can do as thin a line on this side. Sometimes I struggle. Yeah, of course I did. Huh. Didn't do a wing today. Crazy. So John is in France, and so he, instead of between 1517 and 1520, John stayed in France and didn't exercise his regency in person. Instead, he went through Antoine and his other lieutenants. On August 26th, John and Charles, Duke of Alencon, agreed on the Treaty of Rouen. This treaty renewed the old alliance and promised a French royal bride for the king. England requested that John be detained in France for 4 years, and he was. In that time, Margaret returned to Scotland and tried to regain the regency. King James was kept prisoner by John and his lieutenants. Margaret was allowed to see James only once between 1516 and 1524. After the Treaty of Bruges was signed between Henry VIII and Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, Francis I allowed John to go back to Scotland to strengthen the French-Scottish alliance. So remember I said we are doing some new products today? I'm excited. So I saw, it was Rose and Ben. So if you follow her, I've followed her for years on Instagram. She used this and I was like, I have to try this. So it's the Estee Lauder Double Wear Stay in Place Makeup. Now, prior to this video, I have basically either been using House Labs or Modern Radiance Concealer from Vive. And I sometimes at the salon, I work 10-hour days like yesterday. And I've noticed that my foundation was wearing off as the day went on, either from touching my face or sweating or just blow dryers going, talking, blah, blah, blah. So I did buy this to see we'll see if it works. It fucking worked. It doesn't move. I can't even believe I bought an Estee Lauder foundation because I haven't since I was probably in my 20s. But yeah, this is amazing. It really does work. So the Treaty of Rouen was ratified, and Madeleine of Valois was put up as a possible bride for James. When John returned in November of 1521, Margaret sided with him and against her husband. Side note, if you've watched The Spanish Princess, this may seem vaguely familiar to you. They did cover some of this in the show, which I was thankful for, because I think that Margaret Tudor is not talked about as much as she should be, because she was a badass woman. So I think we need to talk about her far more than we do. And she is like the mother of our current monarch. So like the line comes from her. So she needs to be celebrated far more than she is. So you just put that foundation on, and I'm just going to staple this in. Okay. John went to Edinburgh Castle, where they were keeping James, and in a very public ceremony, the keeper gave John the keys, who then gave them to Margaret, and then she passed them back to John. This was to show proof that the government of Scotland was in his hands. And this made it so that John was able to keep the upper hand when it came to Angus. John put Angus under the charges of high treason in December of 1521, and then later sent him to France as basically a prisoner. James's education development had been cut short because of John's captivity in 1525, sorry. James had been given a strong grounding by numerous tutors, including David Lindsay and Gavin Dunbar. James was taught French and Latin. As an adult, though, he spoke broken French, and his Latin wasn't great either, because he needed an interpreter to speak with an Italian bishop. Oh, there's that. Oh, I don't know why I did that first. Come 1524, like I'm saluting. That fucking hurt. So come 1524, John was finally taken out of power by a coup in France. Margaret, with the aid of James Hamilton, first Earl of Arran, as well as his followers, brought James to Edinburgh from Stirling. In August, Parliament declared the regency at an end, and the now 12-year-old king was given his full kingly powers. So November rolls around, and Parliament, that was weird. So, my mic's plugged into it. November rolls around, and Parliament now recognized Margaret as the chief counselor to the king. Henry VIII, Margaret's younger brother, can't seem to mind his own damn business and allows Angus to return to Scotland. I'm sorry, but who invited you to the conversation? Henry, stay in your lane, bro. Angus comes back and gets into an alliance with the Earl of Lennox, who is an enemy of Margaret and Aaron. Angus strolls into Edinburgh with a big group of armed men, claims he has the right to attend Parliament. Margaret says hell no, orders cannons to be fired on them from Edinburgh Castle. Parliament, in a dick move, makes Angus a Lord of the Articles and a member of the Council of Regency. Sorry, but that was like really, really fucking shitty of them. Oh yay, it's trash day. Okay, so I'm going to do blush a little bit differently than I've been doing it. I'm using, this is Pesca. Pesca Sunset Blush Balm from Vive on the apples of my cheeks. So I'm going to kind of come through with that first here. And then, like I said, I wanted like dewy, glowy skin. I'm going to take, that was really fucking loud, Rosa Sunset Blush Balm and put some on the back of my hand, and I'm going to add Skin Dew with it. So probably about equal parts. I'll show you in a second. So about equal parts. Don't mind my shit dance. I didn't do it last night. A long day. So I'm just kind of dab, and then I'm going to come back in. And I'm only going over that Pesca a little bit, but I'm really bringing that color up higher and on my nose. And then I'm taking this and I'm going same route up, like higher on the cheekbone, and I'm bringing it up around my brow. So Angus tried to pull some serious shit. It was decided that each opposing sides would in turn act as a host to James. So now they're like, it's like a divorced parents. You're like being shuttled back and forth. So this fell apart and Angus refused to give up the king. So he basically became a prisoner and Angus tried to win him over with lavish gifts. This got really old for James. So this got really old with James, and Angus tried to woo him with prostitutes. Angus really overreached, and James got really tired of his bullshit, and there were several attempts to free him, James. It wasn't until May 1528 that James finally escaped the clutches of Angus. He fled to Edinburgh Castle, dressed in a disguise, he fled Edinburgh Castle dressed in a disguise and made it to Stirling Castle. There he met with his mother. He went back to Edinburgh Castle 2 months later with a large army, and Angus was summoned for treason. He secluded himself into exile at Tantallon Castle until an agreement was reached, and he was able to exile himself into England. I just had to think about that for a second. I don't know why. The role of king was some pretty big shoes to fill for James. His father was one of the most popular kings and the most effective Stuart monarch. Now, as a king and ruling in his own right, his first action was to remove Angus entirely from the scene. The Douglas family was forced to exile as well, aside from his half-sister Margaret, who was safe in England. There were multiple marriage matches for James, or that were presented to James, from his cousin Princess Mary to Catherine de' Medici. December 1534, Francis pushed that his daughter Madeline's health was too poor for marriage. There was also an investigation on the possibility of James marrying his mistress Margaret Erskine, but come March 1536, a final contract was made for James to wed Mary of Bourbon. And so James traveled to France to meet his bride in person. This would be the first time a Scottish king would voluntarily be away from his realm for 8 months since David II. They landed in Dieppe and traveled to, but when he met, I just did my brows and I didn't hit record, so my brows are done. I'm just gonna wait for them to dry down so I can, my luck, I tell you. So when he met Mary, he wasn't impressed. He left and traveled further south to the court at the Chateau d'Amroy. There he met Madeline, the Princess Madeline. I'm just blending this out. I think I'm missing hair here. Again, he asked Francis for her hand in marriage. He refused. The two really pressed him and he finally gave his permission. The marriage contract was signed in November and they were married in on January 1st at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This marriage also fulfilled the Treaty of Rouen and it renewed the old alliance. I'm going to put it on looking in here. It's a little bit better. My phone is going to blow up. It's so hot. This is a mess today. The union was celebrated for months in France, and the two left in May of 1537 to set sail for Scotland. Madeline fell ill before they left, but the journey still took place. They landed in Leith on May 19th, and Madeline wrote to her father that she was to let him know that her symptoms had diminished and she felt better. But a month later, Queen Madeline died, or she fell ill again and died in James's arms at Holyrood Palace in July of 1537, or on July 7th of 1537, of tuberculosis. James wrote to Francis to let him know that his daughter had passed. She was interred into Holyrood Abbey in Edinburgh. So keeping true, another new makeup. So Queen Musia. I wanted to try their mascara. It looked really cool. And she named the whole line after her cat, which is like, I'm a crazy cat lady. I love this. So this is really a great mascara. You do have to remove a little bit onto like off of the brush. It is on the wetter side. This is new for me, so I'm curious to see how much it's going to dry down over time. And where my sweet spot's going to be. I don't particularly care for mascaras when they're brand new. I like a little bit of weather to them when they start to dry down. So James, keeping true with the treaty, went back to France in search of another wife, and David Beaton was sent to try and get Francis to agree on James marrying his only remaining daughter, Margaret. Instead, Francis offered Mary de Guise. She was the daughter of Claude, Duke of Guise, and was recently widowed. The marriage contract was finalized in January of 1538, and as it was customary, if the king died first, Mary would keep for her lifetime her jointure houses of Falkland Palace, Stirling Castle, Dingwall Castle, and Thrive Castle, as well as the rentals of the earldoms of Fife, Strathern, Ross, and Orkney. Their proxy wedding took place on May 9th in France. 2,000 Scottish lords and barons were present, and Lord Maxwell stood proxy for James. Mary left from Le Havre on June 10th and landed in Fife 6 days later. This was my on this day a few weeks ago on my Instagram page. So if you don't follow me there, go follow me on Instagram. Mary was formally received by the king, her new husband, at St. Andrews a few days later, and the couple were married in person at St. Andrews on June 18th. James increased his income by gaining more control over the royal estate and from the profits of justice, customs, and feudal rights. So I've already done one coat of this. I'm going back in for my second. It's actually getting a little bit better. He spent a lot of money on building up a collection of tapestries that he inherited from his father. Both international and domestic policies were affected by the Reformation his uncle Henry VIII had initiated. Jesus, I can't talk today. So I'm keeping lips simple today, so I'm just going in with the Vive Velvet Sands liner, and I'm going to do the original lip do. He didn't tolerate hearsay or heresy, and during his reign, James, quite a few outspoken Protestants were persecuted. Making it really easy today. Oh, that is dewy. Okay. Furthering into his reign, Ralph Sadler, an English ambassador, tried to encourage James to close the monasteries and take the revenue or take the earnings so he wouldn't have to keep sheep like a mean subject. James informed him that he didn't have any sheep and could rely on his godfather, the King of France. He also said it was against reason to close the abbeys that stand these many years, quote, and God's service maintained and kept in the same, and I might have anything to require them. Sadler knew that James kept sheep on his estate. James did, however, saved money from the church by getting the Pope Clement VII to let him tax the monastic incomes. On January 19th, 1537, Pope Paul III sent James a blessed sword and hat. This was a symbol from a pope in thanks to a monarch that defended Christendom. In this case, it was that, but it was also that James would be strengthened against heresies from across the border. It was given to James on February 25th while he was in France. It's said that James Kilcaldy of Grange, who was his treasurer, tried to persuade James against going after Protestants and to meet with his uncle, Henry VIII, in York. James did correspond with Henry about a meeting in 1536, but Paul advised James and against it and sent an envoy to Scotland to talk about the initiative. Henry sent his tapestries to York in September of 41, but James didn't show. This slight was a sign to England that Scotland was a firm ally of or to both France and Catholicism, and this was a cause for war. James and Mary had their first baby boy, James, on May 22nd of 1540 at St. Andrews. Their second son came 11 months later on April 12th of 1541. His name was Robert or Arthur. Unfortunately, both babies died on April 21st. Mary became pregnant again the following year and delivered a beautiful baby girl on December 8th of 1542, Princess Mary. Prior to his marriages, James had 8 illegitimate children from 7 different mistresses. His son from Margaret Erskine, James, became the first Earl of Moray. He would go on to have quite a colorful life. James spent a lot of money, £41,000 at the time, which is roughly 32 million pounds now, during his adult reign on huge renovations to all the major royal residences and a few smaller ones. The most work was done to Falkland Palace and Stirling Castle. James started the late Gothic James V Tower of the northwest corner of the Palace of Holyrood House. This gave new royal residences on the first and second floors. Linlithgow Palace was closed off the original east entrance, and a new formal access from the south was made. It included an inner gatehouse and an outer entrance gate that had carved arms of the 4 chivalric order that James was a member of. They were the Garter, Thistle, Golden Fleece, and St. Michael. The 3-tiered King's Fountain that was topped by an imperial crown was built in 38 and was the centerpiece of the courtyard. His father, James IV, had started renovations at Falkland Palace, and James extended them. He modeled it after the French Renaissance style between 37 and 41, and also built a tennis court in 41. This still survives and it is the oldest one in the United Kingdom. There was a new late Gothic entrance tower in the southern part, and a new courtyard facades were built in the east and south part in 37 and 39. These are the earliest examples of the Renaissance architecture in the British Isles. The biggest part of James's building adventure, was the work that was done to the royal palaces at Stirling Castle. This was built between 38 and 40. This had Renaissance facades, and the north, east, and south quarters housed the king's and queen's apartments. There was work that was also done at Tantallon, Blackness, and Hermitage Castle. James had many hobbies and interests. It's said that he held the nickname King of the Commons because he would travel around the country dressed like a common man. He was also a lute player. At court, he would maintain a band of Italian musicians who adapted the name Drummond. Fun fact, that is a name that resides is in my husband Mr. D's side. He was also a patron of poets and authors and supported William Stewart and John Bellenden. After he married Marie de Guise, Italian scholar Giovanni Ferrio dedicated the king and queen a new edition of his work on the true significance of comets against the vanity of astrologers. Much like Henry VIII, James had a lot of foreign artists and craftsmen to enhance the prestige of his Renaissance court. I am having problems with my hair today. It is too damn humid today. Sorry. Margaret Tudor died in 1541. And with her death, any peace that with England was gone. War broke out, and at first the Scots won a victory at the Battle of Hayden in August of 42. That's probably wrong, and it's an autocorrect of this stupid fucking computer. Eustace Chapuis, an English imperial ambassador, wrote on October 2nd that the Scottish ambassadors ruled out a meeting between James and Henry in England until after Mary de Guise delivered her child. Henry didn't accept this and sent his army to Scotland. James was with his army in Lauder on All Hallows Eve of 42, and even though he wanted to invade England, his nobilities resisted. He went back to Edinburgh, but on the way he wrote to his wife in French saying that he had been sick for 3 days. November 24th, Scots army wrote to his wife. On November 24th, the Scots army were defeated at the Battle of Solway Moss. James spent a few days at Linlithgow with Queen Mary, who was in the last few weeks of her pregnancy. But on December 6th, James went to Falkland Palace, where his illness worsened. Even though his army was defeated at Solway Moss, James wasn't humiliated by it. Neither was the noble dissatisfaction. He had a lot of support for his war policy, and in early December, he made a plan to renew the conflict with England. However, James was on his deathbed in Falkland, and when he was told of the birth of his daughter, John Knox reported that he said, "It came with a lass, and it will gang with a lass," meaning it started with a girl and it will end with a girl. It's assumed that he was talking about the House of Stuart because it started with Marjorie Bruce and would end with Mary. It's thought he was referring to his own daughter, but the Stuart line did actually end with a woman, Queen Anne of Great Britain. James died at Falkland Palace on December 14th at the age of 30 by either cholera or dysentery. He was succeeded by his 9-day-old daughter, Mary. On January 7th of 1543, his body was brought from Falkland to the Forth Ferry at Kinghorn. Then he was brought to Edinburgh and buried at Holyrood Abbey on January 8th. He was laid next to his first wife, Madeline, and his 2 sons, James and Robert, by his second wife, Mary. A stone tomb was placed that had been carved with a lion, a crown, and an inscription of Roman letters. During the rough wooing of 1544 and 1547, England invaded Edinburgh and destroyed James's tomb. However, there is a royal vault in the ruins of the abbey that does contain his remains. Now we're going to get into fun facts. So fun facts for this episode about James V. Until Elizabeth II, James was the last monarch of the British Isles as a whole to die in Scotland. He reigned for 29 years of his 30-year life. James carried the Plantagenet Woodville trait of red hair. I'm saying this because both Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville had been described as having varying shades of red, either auburn or golden blonde, like copper. I do say this as a hairstylist. If it's golden blonde, it is blonde, but the gold is going to give it the hints of, it's going to indicate that the gene is there. This is a recessive gene, and it did carry through their children via Elizabeth of York, her children, I believe all 4 surviving children, and then their children. Like his father, James was a beloved King of Scotland. So that is my episode on James V. I hope that you enjoyed it. I tried to make something of the mess that my hair is today, and I'm not sweating, so that's really good, I guess. As usual, everything I've used is in the description box down below. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, and please, please, please leave a comment. That really, really helps to boost my videos into the algorithm that is YouTube, or that YouTube has. Next week, I think there's another collab coming, but if there isn't, that's coming down the pipeline. So I'm trying to think. You can also find me on Instagram at Makeup and Monarchies, as well as TikTok. I do post on this day things whenever there's big stuff, which is typically every day. Also, I am on buymeacoffee.com/Makeup and Monarchies. If you enjoy this and would like to support my endeavors, if you will, you can head on over there and buy me coffee. Mind you, I am a Starbucks addict, so that would really help. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something new. I think that's about it for this week, guys. It's been a struggle filming this today because my phone's dying, like I'm out of storage, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.